Elon Musk is once again in the spotlight, this time embroiled in a heated legal debate with the IRS. His Department of Government Efficiency is pushing for access to highly sensitive taxpayer data, raising concerns about privacy, political interference, and the future of tax enforcement in the US. Is this a move towards transparency, or is Musk attempting to rewrite the rules of financial oversight? Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Trump's influence is shaking Europe's political foundations as his administration emboldens far-right movements and redefines transatlantic alliances. European leaders are questioning whether America remains a trusted partner or is it becoming an emerging adversary. Are we witnessing a shift in global power dynamics? We'll find out. I'm Hani Saif, and let's get in focus. Elon Musk's latest battle isn't in the tech world, it's with the IRS. His Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, is demanding access to the IRS's integrated data retrieval system, a move that critics say could set a dangerous precedent for political interference in tax enforcement. Is this about accountability, or is Musk crossing the line? The Politico reports that Musk's DOGE is seeking access to the IRS highly sensitive taxpayer database, raising alarms over potential privacy violations. Critics call it a blatant power grab, with Democratic lawmakers labeling it illegal overreach and former Treasury officials warning that no administration has ever granted such access. The White House defends the move, claiming it will expose government waste and fraud. With the IRS already under scrutiny, Musk's push could further politicize the agency. Is this true reform, or is he weaponizing federal data for his own interests? And to help us break this down, we're joined by Ms. Ginger Chapman, an attorney, political analyst. Ms. Chapman, welcome to In Focus. Now, DOGE's push for the IRS access has raised concerns about the privacy violations. How unprecedented is this request, and what legal implications could it have for taxpayer data security?
Thank you for having me today. And under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, Article 2 grants the president the right to carry out the laws passed by Congress, the right to create and enforce treaties, and also the right to appoint government officials. So from the beginning, Trump's appointment of Elon Musk falls within his authority under Article 2 of the Constitution. What we are seeing is the Democrat Party mobilize their groups and engage in lawfare in order to slow down Trump's push through the federal agencies to expose what he believes is fraud, waste, and abuse. And what we have actually seen is that Trump is extremely transparent about what's being uncovered. Trump feels that his best defense is to make public everything that's going on so that the American people, in particular the voters, can understand exactly to what extent the American government has been carrying out activities that the American people do not know they have been conducting, and that the American people do not know we have been paying for. Now, with respect to data privacy, it should be noted that Musk and his team have read-only access, so they cannot actually alter any records. They have the same access that an auditor would have to government records. And in fact, The Doge office was created under President Obama during his healthcare rollout in order to make government computer systems, government agencies more efficient in how they use their computer systems.
Mhm.
Trump repurposed Doge for this purpose. And one other thing, the Musk already on a personal level has the private data of many Americans. Millions of Americans have willingly turned over their private data to PayPal, eBay, Facebook. So these tech companies, private companies, already have extensive access to American data.
Mhm. Well, the critics argue that this move, yes, it could politicize the IRS and undermine the public trust in tax enforcement. Do you welcome the politicizing of the IRS? Do you see this as a legitimate risk, even as you've mentioned, even if it is legal and legitimate? Or do you think that Musk's camp justifies this call as an effort to improve the government efficiency?
Well, politicizing the IRS has been a very hot topic in the United States in history. If you'll recall, President Nixon, when he resigned, one of the charges against Nixon was that he politicized the IRS to go after his political enemies. More recently, we saw the charges against Obama that he politicized the IRS to investigate, audit, and put down his political opponents, Republican and conservative groups. There were hearings in Congress. Famously, the head of the IRS, Lois Lerner, took the fifth and immediately resigned. So the IRS is a vast treasure trove of information, not just about the American people, but about our economy, consumers, and it is a very tempting target to use that information to go after political enemies. So this is going to be a very fine line that Musk and Trump are going to have to thread. Right now, Trump he has the confidence of the American people based on the number of votes he got. However, the lawfare against him could be very effective. We saw the judge just 24 hours ago extend the ban of Musk and his team to have access. Now, interestingly, because the ban has to address political appointees, the judge also banned the director of the Treasury Department, the Secretary of Treasury, Bessent, appointed by Trump, from himself accessing those records, which shows how it's very difficult to ban one group of political appointees without blocking the Secretary of the Treasury himself from being able to access the records he needs to do his job.
So with these bans and the history of this contentious topic of politicizing the IRS, do you see the Congress intervening to block Doge's request? And if it does, if it does that, what legal sort of battles could follow? And do you foresee this case maybe even reaching the Supreme Court?
Well, right now, under our system of checks and balances, this battle is between the judiciary and the executive, the presidential branch, over who has authority over these agencies. If Congress steps in and the legislative branch gets involved, it could be very messy. I would like to point out that the two wars that happened on American soil, the Revolution against the British was over taxation, and the Civil War, even though it was fought over slavery, what triggered the fighting was the northern states imposing taxes and tariffs on the southern states. And that economic hit triggered the Civil War. So taxes are a hot point in the United States. And the danger here is we're seeing the American people taking sides and mobilizing against each other over these fights that are happening in the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative branch. Mm-hmm. So taxes are a hot point. As the lawfare in general increases and tempers are rising in America, people are becoming more polarized. And when the weather gets warmer, some of these battles might wind up taking it to the streets. So this has the potential to be a flashpoint of civil unrest, regardless of the lawfare that's playing out in the courtrooms. And yes, this could go to the Supreme Court. And it looks like many of these lawfare cases blocking Trump are on a fast track to the Supreme Court. But when it comes to taxes, the IRS in this country, this has the potential to be a flashpoint for conflict.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ms. Chapman, Musk has framed Doge's mission as a way to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse within the government agencies. Yet, you've mentioned that this could jeopardize the U.S. financial oversight mechanisms and hamper government tax revenues. Do you think that this new U.S. administration can risk maybe even protests going to the streets as the weather gets warmer, as you've mentioned?
Yes, one of the things we've seen in Trump's second term is he has come out fighting. He's taking very bold, aggressive action, making dramatic, bold moves, making dramatic, bold statements. This is his last term. He does not have to campaign again. And it's not that he's looking for a fight. He wants peace in America, but this is turning into a battle between the American people and the bureaucratic administrative state. And as the American people are finding out, the bureaucratic state has been spending money on things that work against the interests of the American people. And as more of the books are opened with USAID, with the Treasury Department, and as the American people see where more of their money is going, for example, with USAID books being open, we have discovered that America has been funding both sides of many conflicts. We have been funding Al-Qaeda, we have been funding the Taliban. At the same time, we are funding groups against them. So the United States has been acting against the interests of its own citizens, has been spending vast quantities of money and kept it hidden from the American taxpayers. And 2025 could be the year that this all comes to a head.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Chapman, one final question now. This controversy comes as Musk faces increasing scrutiny over his cryptocurrency dealings and offshore holdings. Now, could the IRS's own investigation into Musk be influencing his push for access to taxpayer data?
Well, Musk, if he could, would probably repeat Trump and say this is a witch hunt. The lawfare cases against Musk started when he purchased X, renamed it Twitter, and opened up a little bit more free speech. That's when the lawfare and the court cases, the lawsuits against Musk started. So yes, this could be presented as cases that would threaten his interests directly. He receives massive government subsidies for SpaceX, for Tesla, and he's in the unique position of now saying, I don't need the subsidies. And it looks like Musk is trying to transition from his entrepreneur billionaire perhaps into a greater political role. That remains to be seen. However, Musk's deep entanglement with his private industry, with the American government, that is going to cause complications for him, and that is a weak point for him as he tries to defend himself against these lawsuits. Mm-hmm. He is not an arm's length. He has a vested interest in these outcomes.
Ms. Ginger Chapman, thank you very much for your insights into this unfolding legal battle. It's clear that Musk's fight with the IRS isn't just about tax records. It could reshape how the U.S. government enforces financial laws. Now, while Musk fights for control over tax data in the U.S., across the Atlantic, Trump's administration is waging a different battle, one that's shaping Europe's political landscape. And Trump's America First agenda is no longer just a domestic policy. It's fueling a new wave of far-right nationalism in Europe. From Germany's AfD to Hungary's Orbán government, his administration is building alliances with leaders who share his vision while pushing traditional European allies aside. Is this a calculated strategy, or is the US isolating itself from Europe? Now, according to Gideon Rachmans of the Financial Times, Vance's Munich speech wasn't just a misstep, it was a direct challenge to Europe's stability. Instead of addressing Russia or China, the US vice president attacked European leaders, accusing them of suppressing free speech and failing to control immigration. While European officials were alarmed, the far right welcomed the speech, seeing it as Trump's endorsement of nationalist leaders like Viktor Orban. Rachmans argues that Europe must now prepare for life without US support. But is this a wake-up call or a deeper crisis in the making? And joining us now over the phone to discuss this issue is Dr. Mohammed Osman, the International Affairs Specialist. Dr. Osman, thank you for joining us here on In Focus. Sir, now Vance's speech openly questioned Europe's commitment to democracy and free speech. How do you interpret this rhetoric, and what message is Trump's administration sending to the European leaders?
Thank you for having me, Hani. I think that what Europe experienced during the last version of the Munich conference in Germany was a rude awakening. They were on the receiving end of a rude awakening. Europe realized suddenly that they are nothing but a subordinate force to the United States, a proxy of the United States, a second player or a supporter or a sidekick of the United States. Because when the United States decided to kick them around publicly and dismantle the structures that held them together, the globalist project in general, it actually caused them to panic, and they suddenly realized that they cannot survive on their own. J.D. Vance took jabs at the leaders of European countries, to the modus operandi of many of the European political classes, basically. And also he made it very clear that the new administration in the United States is not on board with what Europe stands for at the moment, politically, even economically, in terms of tariffs and in terms of protectionism, and of course militarily and from the security standpoint. And of course this has sent shockwaves across Europe recently, and how the United States is trying to unilaterally settle the Ukraine conflict, and how they are trying to, and how the current U.S. administration and many of its leading members are openly supporting the right-wing elements and right-wing parties and politicians in several European countries. Some of them that will experience elections very soon, including Germany, the leader of the European Union, basically. So I think they have grounds for alarm, yet they should never have been surprised that this would be their ultimate fate, the Europeans, I mean.
Yes. Well, sir, you've mentioned Trump's foreign policy is increasingly aligning with Europe's far-right movements. So how do you see this shift affecting the European politics, and could it lead to a more fragmented EU? And you've also mentioned the upcoming German elections, the leader of the EU. So how do you see the European politics shifting or shaping up in the near future?
They will drastically change, because most of the European far-right parties and populist parties are actually Eurosceptic. They do not believe in the viability of the European Union. They do not believe in the core values that hold the European Union together. And they do not even believe in the economic principles that hold the European Union together. So this is a very dangerous development. We already have far-right populist governments in a country like Hungary with Viktor Orban, in a country like Slovakia recently with the election of the Prime Minister Fico, and now in Germany, the AfD, the Alternative Party for Germany, is polling second in the upcoming election. They might actually cross the 20% threshold in the upcoming election. This, of course, will make them fall short of forming a government. However, the current governing party, the SDP, the Socialist Party of Chancellor Scholz, will probably, along with the Green Party, lose this election. Probably we will have a Christian Democrat party government, a coalition government. I don't think anyone, of course, is going to actually cooperate or try to form a coalition with the AFD, but the AFD does have substantial influence. And the United States, the current government of the U.S. or the administration, openly supports and endorses the AFD and their leaders. So, of course, this is very alarming. And the AFD is Eurosceptic. It is actually very sympathetic towards the Russian, meaning that they are not in favor of supporting Ukraine. So this could be a disaster. However, I don't think they will form a government. However, yet they will be a factoring force that will pressure the EU further and make it that could potentially make it less viable, especially if they have a big amount of seats in the Bundestag that can actually obstruct German EU-oriented policies, if you know what I mean, and especially yes, German funding and loans for other EU countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are concerns, sir, that Trump is preparing to strike a deal with Putin over Ukraine now without any input from European leaders. Could this mark the beginning of U.S. disengagement from NATO's security structure?
I'm afraid so, yes. I think now there are indications that the United States during the Munich conference have made it very clear that they are not interested in maintaining any long-term, exaggerated long-term security arrangements in Europe, and definitely a deal with a unilateral deal between Russia and the United States. Regarding Ukraine, probably will not only address Ukraine, the upcoming negotiations in Saudi Arabia, they will also address the geopolitics of both Russia and the United States. And it's reported that the U.S. is willing to reduce its military presence inside Europe as part of an agreement with Russia, meaning basically giving Russia some of the security demands it demanded before the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. One of them was the reduction of NATO forces in Eastern Europe, in the eastern part of NATO. And the U.S. reportedly is willing to withdraw troops from the Baltic states, which were former members of the Soviet Union, not even the Warsaw Pact. So, of course, this will be a watershed moment in Europe, the European security structure. It will be a decisive blow to the idea of collective security, to the idea of the long-term, unconditional U.S. commitment to the security of NATO and the European Union, whose members, the majority of its members are members of NATO. So, of course, the Europeans are genuinely concerned, and that's why they are thinking of increasing their own collective defense arrangements within the premise of EU and even within the premise of NATO. And now they are trying to pledge more security assistance and military aid to Ukraine to ensure that Zelensky and his government will not succumb to U.S. pressure and will not yield to the Russian demand, because apparently any potential agreement in the foreseeable future, at least with the variables we see, will not take into consideration properly Ukrainian interests and will be very in favor of Russian interests, basically, and will be more conducive to their demand. However, I do not think the Europeans can fill this gap. The Europeans do not even have the capacity to defend themselves.
Yes.
So I think that it's a lost cause, Hani.
Dr. Osman, one final question because we're running out of time, so let's make this quick now by quoting the nationalist leaders like Hungary's Viktor Orbán while sidelining traditional allies. Is Trump signaling a break from America's historic role as Europe's protector?
Oh, yes, he's making that very clear. He said that you have to pay for protection. So that doesn't mean that he will entirely disengage, because if Trump entirely disengages from Europe and abandons Europe, this will be a geopolitical suicide for the United States. I don't think even Trump would be crazy enough to pursue such a course of action. However, he will be willing to exert concessions and make them pay for that protection. He is asking them to up the expenditure of GDP on defense to 3%, and now he's even demanding that it rises to 5%. And that's way above the 2% threshold stipulated by NATO. So yes, he will ask them to pay for protection.
Yes. Dr. Mohammed Osman, always a pleasure having you with us on the show. Thank you for your analysis. Ladies and gentlemen, it's clear that Trump's policies aren't just influencing the US foreign relations, they're also reshaping Europe's entire political landscape. From Musk's power struggle with the IRS to Trump's growing influence over Europe's political future, the battle for control isn't just about laws or policies. It's about who gets to rewrite the rules of global power. That's all the time we have for this episode of In Focus. I'm Hani Saif. See you next time.